Alright, it's finally time. Overwatch League Season 3 is just a few short weeks away, and after spending an off-season looking at the past, I'm gonna take a quick break and look into the future. It's time to unveil my Overwatch League Season 3 Preseason Power Rankings. A few things to say before we start. First of all, if my voice sounds a little different, it's because I'm recording in a different room than what I usually do. And that's why it might be a little more echoey or something, so I apologize in advance for that. Secondly, you may notice that this video isn't as highly edited as most of my season review content. This is because, to be honest, I don't want to sink too much time into editing this video. I really want to finish the series before we're halfway through Season 3. So if you're new and you're interested in some high quality Overwatch League content, I would highly suggest you check out my season in review series. I'm a little biased, but I think it's pretty good. For the same reason, I'm not going to be splitting this video into two parts. I'm doing all 20 teams right now. So in the interest of this video not being an hour long, I'll be moving through the teams pretty quickly. Finally, what I'm about to say is of course my personal opinion and my opinion alone. You may disagree with me. You may disagree with me a lot, and that's awesome. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments after the video is over. I personally can't wait to laugh at myself at the end of Season 3 when I realize how wrong I was. So with that out of the way, let's get into the countdown. Starting with number 20, the Boston Uprising. Myeongbong is great. Boston somehow managed to land the best free agent flex support not named Alarm. The problem is, that seems to be about all they have. I mean, I expect Fusions to still be a solid piece and in-game leader, and I actually rate Swimmer quite highly to be at least a decent main support, assuming he can synergize with Myeongbong, but I'm scared the team picked up Brucin based on his World Cup performance alone, which I do not like. And also their DPS lineup is terribly uninspiring. Unless Color Hex can play Widow all the time, and Jerry is somehow the best player that Boston has ever fielded and we just didn't know, this is looking to be one of the weakest, if not the weakest DPS line in the league. And then of course there's the problem of the organization. I just can't trust them. So with that in mind, I can't comfortably put this team above anyone else. Number 19, the LA Valiant. I have just a little more confidence in the Valiant than the Uprising, and that mostly boils down to the organization. I trust Immortals and Packing 10 way more than I trust the Kraft Group and Huck to not only pick the roster that they think will work best for them, but also to develop them as the season goes on. To their credit, I think Rain and Lastro can come together and be a pretty good support line. But from my understanding, this team has 3 hitscan DPS in Shax, KSP, and KSF, which leaves the entirety of the flex DPS role up to Apply, aka the DPS of the 4 that I'm the least confident in. And then we get to the tanks, and McGravy should be alright, but at main tank you have to pick between Dreamer and Gig. The only good thing I can say about that is at least they have options. To me, this roster just screams, we didn't want to spend money on player contracts this season. I think their play will reflect that. Number 18, the Paris Eternal. Paris this season are very reminiscent of the Shock in Season 1. It all comes down to if they can stay about even in wins and losses until Sparkle comes of age. Sparkle was, of course, the biggest free agent name going into the offseason, and Paris not only landed him, but his coach too, which is huge, but he can't play for 2/3 of the season. And until then, you probably have to play with Nico as your flex DPS, which is not inspiring to me. I think Paris' biggest strengths come with their support line. I think Cruz and Gray and even newcomer FD God will be pretty good. But then you get to main tank, and it's between Benbest, who was not good and got benched in Season 2, and No Smite, who was not good and got benched in Season 2. And then of course there's always the high probability that Sparkle gets Sinatra syndrome, where everyone's hyped him up so much that he turns 18, gets on stage, and can't possibly fill everyone's expectations. Like, Sparkle's really good, but he's not gonna solo carry. That being said, if you add a decent main tank to this team, they might be one to watch in Season 4. Number 17, the Chengdu Hunters. Most of this placement comes from not being confident in their new pickups. Ating, Molly, and Langsa were all decent players for the Hunters Academy team, which was the best team in Chinese contenders, but that same team got wiped every time they went to an international event. I want to say that Chengdu's biggest strength is in their DPS. With Leaf coming of age, the Hunters finally have a potential star-level DPS to pair with Jinmu. But when I look at the moves that the Hunters made this offseason, I don't think it's enough to compare with what most of the other teams have done. A team that was just barely on the playoff bubble last season shouldn't be complacent, but that's what it feels like. They'll either play the meta and just be worse than most of the other teams, or stick with their off-meta style, but they don't have the element of surprise anymore. So I can't trust it. Number 16, the London Spitfire. Alright, London finally decided they had had enough, they blew everything up, and they're starting over. I was super against London's new roster when it was first coming out, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized that I don't hate it. I don't like it, but I don't hate it. Glister flew more under the radar than Sparkle because he wasn't on Element Mystic, but he was a pretty nutty Doomfist for Gen G and has a great hit scan aim to go along with it. I think you can also depend on Hylie to be a decent player. I rate Bernard pretty well because of his time on Fusion University, and not to mention Krillin. Like, of all the players on Splendid Spitfire Season 2, this was the one guy they hung on to, and I really want to know why. Hopefully it's because he's Jonak too, but you never know. Then of course you have a bunch of players who could be good, like J-Mac, Shui, and Fuse, and if everyone that I just mentioned ends up panning out and playing really well, London can make the postseason. In fact, this is the first team that I can potentially imagine making the postseason. That's why I have them rated this high. But for that to happen, so many things have to go right for London, and I just can't commit to it. What's more likely is we have one breakout star, a few decent pieces, and the rest are pretty bad, landing London in the bottom 5. Number 15, the Florida Mayhem. Florida made good moves this offseason. Players like Gangnam Jin and Yaki are really good pickups, and are the main reason why this team will finally be able to climb out of the cellar. However, I don't think they've done enough to make the playoffs. People like to point to players like Saya Player and Gargoyle, and yes, they both have high peaks, but Saya Player has proven himself to be decent to below average at anything other than Widow, and I personally think the Gargoyle hype is very overblown, because 1, he got credit for being better than Zephyr, like come on, and 2, he popped off on Roadhog and a Halt Hook meta. Like, how much can you really put into that? Plus, you've still got to play around Chris as your only main support, and this season is probably Fate's last chance to prove himself on the Overwatch League stage before we just get rid of him entirely. Florida is up this high because I think they have a higher floor than everyone else. They're the first team that I think has little to no chance at coming in dead last. But are they playoff contenders? I don't think so. Number 14, the Houston Outlaws. Believe it or not, I originally had this team in 17th place, but I think the late signing of Jexay is huge. Not only does he get to reunite with his former Element Mystic support duo in Repel, but with Jake and probably Raucus too out of the starting lineup, the door is wide open for Jexay to take a leadership role within Houston, rather than fighting with Fissure for it on Seoul. I think this was a great pickup to fill the biggest hole in the team at main support, and their DPS lineup is going to be decent at least. I imagine Dante and Hydration will probably be the starters, with Linkser coming in sometimes as a sniper specialist, which doesn't sound too bad. The pressure then falls on the tank line. Meko is a big pickup, but he has absolutely no experience on a mixed nationality roster, or for that matter, any roster other than LW Blue, which then eventually turned into NYXL. If Houston, with their new head coach Harsha, can comfortably transition Meko into this new environment and integrate him into the tank line with Muma, I think this team can be pretty scary. However, doing that might be harder than it originally sounds. Number 13, the Dallas Fuel. Dallas made some big moves this offseason, no doubts about that. All of a sudden, this formerly lackluster DPS line is scary, with Decay and Doha probably filling out the starting 2 slots. I think these are 2 DPS players who can drag the Fuel kicking and screaming to wins, which they haven't really had since Effect. The rest of the team, however, causes concern. The support line is staying the same, and while I still rate Unko and Closer pretty high overall, they were very average, maybe even a little below average last season. They need to pick it up here or risk being replaced. Meanwhile, Gamsu I think is a great pickup. This guy can be the team leader and emotional rock that they desperately needed last season. But note, in a meta that for once seems to have shoved D.Va out entirely, seems like the obvious weak link here. Unless Mickey comes out of nowhere with a really good Sigma, Note needs to either prove that he's not a Diva 1 trick, or the Fuel need to pick someone up who isn't. Number 12, the Washington Justice. Corey is insane. Let's get that out of the way first and foremost. This dude will carry Washington to wins. His mechanics in sniping and tracking are just that good. But other than that, what do we have? We have Roar, who is average at best in Season 1. He'll probably play an alright Orisa, unless they opt to play Lulshish instead for the synergy with their only off-tank, Elivote. And then you have a support line of Arc and Angod, and Arc is fine playing Lucio, he'll probably have a decent Baptiste. And then you have Angod, who's good at the game, but is rumored to be disruptive to a team environment in the past, especially if things start to go wrong. Even their other DPS, like Stratus, is decent, but we've only really seen him perform well on Mei, and who knows what to think about Tuba. This is the first team on the list where I don't think there's anyone there who's really bad, but in my eyes, what this boils down to is Corey trying to drag an otherwise mediocre team to the playoffs. At least in 12th, I think they get it. Number 11, the Toronto Defiant. Well, this team won't be the forgotten team anymore, I'll give them that. From a marketing perspective, they've gotten popular players with an emphasis on Canadian talent to drum up homestand ticket sales. So hats off to them, your homestands are going to be great. But when you look at the Defiant and ask, are they going to win Overwatch League? That's when things get doubtful. From my point of view, on all three roles, this team has a good player and a question mark. Jerfor is still a really good player, but then you're probably looking at Agility as your main flex DPS, and he was just okay last season. Kariv is a really good player and can be super impactful on the flex support position, but I need Kellex to prove to me that he can do the same, or at least be more competent than he was in Boston. Beast is almost a complete unknown on main tank, and the most commonly pointed out weak link. I mean, he is the only main tank they have, but if Nevix can't transition him to the Overwatch League stage, I don't think anyone else can. I think that at the very least, this team will be alright and take wins off of the weakest teams. But if all the question marks I mentioned end up hitting their peaks, this is a dark horse playoff contender. Number 10, the Seoul Dynasty. Seoul, you were doing so good. You signed Prophet and Gesture, and you looked like one of the best teams in the league. But then you got rid of Fleta, and you got rid of Jaehong, and I just don't know what to think anymore. Like, Prophet is still one of the best overall players in the league, and he will carry. But I can't help but feel like there's trouble brewing in Seoul. This team seems to be split into two parts. The OG Seoul, like Toby, Fitz, Illicit, Marvel, Michelle, and the incoming London players, like Gesture, Prophet, and Bedosin. The only flex tank on this team is Michelle, and you have two good main tanks in Gesture and Marvel, but it feels like no matter which one of those you pick, you're going to make the other side upset, even if you have Gesture Orisa and Marvel Sigma. Not to mention Toby has to get used to playing with Bedosin after having Jaehong as a support partner for like 3 years in a row. And then, of course, we have no idea if either Fitz or Illicit will be able to be valid second DPS partners to Prophet. To be clear, there's a lot of really good pieces on Seoul, but I just don't trust that they'll be able to piece them all together to the point where they can challenge for a title. Therefore, I can't place them any higher than this. Number 9, the LA Gladiators. Can you make OG and Birdring care again? If the LA Gladiators want to challenge for a title, this is what they have to do. Both of these players were, to put it lightly, uninspiring in the latter half of Season 2. They need to prove that they can perform when put into the right environment. They've still got a strong support line in Shaz and Big Goose to help them out, and pieces like Mirror and Space I think are still going to be really good no matter what. But OG and Birdring are the two X factors. They have to do well. Otherwise, we might be depending on players like Jaru and LH Cloudy. Gladiators fans, be honest. Are you confident in that? Number 8, the Guangzhou Charge. This is a good team. I look at their roster, and I see a bunch of good to above average players. Happy, Narrow, and Eileen are good. Rio is pretty good. Krong is good. Shu is good. Chara is okay, but if he doesn't work out, then you have Neptuno, who's good. The problem here is that I just don't think the Charge are great. Unlike the teams above them, they just don't give me the wow factor for me to think that they can legitimately compete for a championship. Like, unless we can get into a meta where Happy can play Widow, and Narrow can Pharah, and Shu can Zen, and Neptuno can Mercy, I can see this team really coming together, but that requires a very specific meta. Who knows, maybe Krong or WYA are the X-Factor pieces that this team needs and that catapults them to the top. But I think this team is just really good. They'll make it to the playoffs, but they'll eventually fall to a team that's just a little bit better. Number 7, the Vancouver Titans. Yeah, that hurt me to say probably as much as it hurt you to hear it. Here's the deal, if I could do some Reddit-style theory crafting, I would say that after this team lost 4-0 to the Shock in the Season 2 finals, the organization behind this team panicked. They decided there was no way that they would be able to beat the Shock in their current state, and they needed to make some moves. So they end up cutting Bumper and Teasy in order to find Fissure out of retirement, which just seems like a bad idea. Like, if you look at it from face value, it's not bad. Fissure is objectively a really good main tank, and he can even play a similar style to Bumper, where he gets a majority of the team's resources to work with. But then you remember how controversial he can be, and how he got kicked off of several of his other teams, and how the Titans succeeded last season largely through the years of built-up synergy. And throwing it all away for a huge yellow flag and Fissure as your only main tank just seems stupid. Like, why not just keep Tizzy as a backup plan? Why do you have to have the league minimum of 8 players? Also, why is Jaehong here? Nothing against the guy, but you have a Rookie of the Year candidate in Twilight, and you could have used that 8th roster slot on someone that I think you might actually use. Look, there's obviously a lot of talent on this roster, and that's why the Titans are the first of my 7 teams that I think have a legitimate chance to take home the trophy. But their offseason baffles me. And with rumors that the players are already at odds with their coaching staff, I can't confidently put them any higher. Number 6, the Shanghai Dragons. I think this team's recent decision to promote Fearless was huge. I originally had the Dragons a couple spots lower. When people talked about the Dragons before that, they talked about how a DPS lineup with Ding, Fleta, DM, and even Lip were insane, one of the most high-powered in the league. But then they'd get to stand 1, their only main tank, and scratch their heads. The question was if they could win in spite of stand 1. And now that Fearless is back, after training on the Academy team, and he has an actual team around him on stage, I could see Fearless being one of the biggest breakout stars and redemption stories of Season 3. I'm not kidding. Pair him with Void on off-tank, any DPS combo they have, Lee Jae-gong on main support, I would be scared. My biggest concern with Shanghai is that they're bringing in a lot of new people from a lot of new places in the Overwatch scene, and when that happens, there's always a chance that it blows up in their face. But I think it's likely that this team will continue building on the positive momentum they had in Season 1, and I can't wait to watch it. Number 5, Hangzhou Spark. Hangzhou didn't change much this offseason, and that's because they didn't really need to. This team steadily improved throughout the entirety of Season 2, until they were the consensus 4th best team in the league. But if we're talking about the Spark as potential championship contenders in Season 2, I think their weakest point was at flex support. Bebe was just alright. That's why I think the promotion of Coldest is massive. I have heard nothing but great things about his performance in Contenders China, and I think he has the potential to be that explosive flex support player that you need to win an Overwatch League these days. Whether they pair him with Mika or IDK, the support line will be strong. With that taken care of, the biggest concern for me is if Adora is going to be able to keep up with Godsby on DPS, and the rest of the team for that matter. Last season, they seemed to do the best when the spotlight was not put on him and he played more of a supporting role, or if he was out entirely. But with Bozzy now on a 2-way contract, Adora is probably starting. He is the obvious weak link to me. But the rest of Hangzhou looks so strong that I have faith in their ability to compete in the highest levels anyways. Number 4, the Atlanta Reign. The first thing you'll note about the Reign is that they are filled with confidence, alpha personalities. They believe in their own potential more than anyone else, and I can see why. Their DPS are nuts, first of all. Edison, Earthster, and Sharp, like everyone else, may as well just go home. This team has you covered no matter what the meta is. You've got Gator, who I think was a very pleasant surprise in last season's playoffs, and if he flops, you've got Pokpo, who is still really good in Season 1. And I think Hawk performed quite well at last season's Gauntlet. My biggest concern is with the support line. That's it. Masa is good, he's always been solid, but the competition and pressure is way higher on the team this season. And Dogman improved a lot in Season 1, but if we're looking at the Reign as potential championship contenders, he is still the weakest link and needs to keep that upward momentum going. The question is if he will, because no offense to Dogman, I really like the guy, but he seems like the kind of person who might let the preseason hype get to his head. These are all minor complaints though. This is one of the most complete teams in the league right now, and I think they'll be right in the mix to take the trophy. Number 3, the Philly Fusion. Should they have picked up another main tank to compete with Sato? Yeah. Do I think they can win anyways? Yeah. After 2 seasons of anticipation, Alarm is finally here, and I can't wait to see what he does on the Overwatch League stage. And then you combine him with Funny Astro, who I rate very highly from his time on Atlanta Academy, and I think this has the potential to be the best support line in Overwatch. You've got Fury on off-tank now, which is massive, one of the best off-tanks in the league. I'm still not quite sure how you managed to do that. And even if Carpe and EQO aren't working for you, you've got promising newcomers in Ivy and Hisu. I actually rate Ivy a lot higher than I think most people do. I think he was put in a really bad situation on Toronto, and he could really shine here. Oh yeah, and Chipsa is also there. Look, Sato is still the only main tank, and that's cause for some concern, but let's put it this way. The way I decided between the Reign and the Fusion is I asked myself, who am I more concerned about, Sato or Dogman? And the answer was Dogman. While I think Dogman has a chance to be detrimental to the team, I think Sato can't elevate a team, but he reflects the skill level of the people around him. Now that he has this all-star team, I think he can do his job and more. I would still like another main tank though, just to be safe. Number 2, NYXL. Once again, the 3rd place team from Season 2 is keeping most of their roster together. This team can win, I really do think so. Look, they lost Mecca, and that is a significant piece of their roster and disrupts the synergy that they've been building for the past 3 years. But Hoppa signals a change of pace for New York. They might try to play a more aggressive, in-your-face playstyle than the passive reactionary style they're known for, which they were really good at, but every once in a while, a team would just figure them out, and then they were in trouble. This would theoretically give them an even higher ceiling, but even if it doesn't work out, they still have Bianca to fall back on. Not to mention their new project DPS and Who Are You that they don't even need, but it would be massive if he works out. Like, this guy has tons of potential. NYXL are one of the safest bets to be in the mix for the title once again, and that's why they're up here. But in the end, there is one team that's higher. Number 1, the San Francisco Shock. Big surprise, right? The Shock were the best team in Overwatch at the end of Season 1, and it wasn't particularly close. So, as you'd expect, they changed almost nothing, because they don't need to. I don't need to tell you why this roster is terrifying. All you need to do is watch them systematically dismantling the Titans in last season's Grand Finals. All that is back. In fact, they're even better after boot camping in Korea last month. Yeah, the Shock aren't resting on their laurels. They want to build the dynasty that Seoul wishes they could have. And unless Nevix and some assistant coaches were what was holding the team together, San Francisco are still the team that everyone is looking the top in Season 3. If you want to hold the trophy, you'll have to go through them. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed me looking in the future for once. What do you think about my power rankings in Season 3? Feel free to roast them in the comments while also letting me know what you're the most excited for. As always, if you liked this video, leave a like. And subscribe with the bell if you want notifications on every new video. And before I go, I want to thank you guys for 25,000 subscribers. I wonder almost every day why a 19-year-old gold player like me has a platform to talk about Overwatch League, but I do, and it's amazing, and it's because of you guys. I really do appreciate you all. I'm looking forward to finishing Season in Review and making even more content for you in 2020. Let's go for another 25k before the year ends. Anyways, up next is the Vancouver Titans Season in Review. Until then though, don't get tilted.